The Truth About Goblins. Chapter 36. Alone in the darkness, Timothy stood still, listening for a noise aside from the water pump at the other end of the room. A moment of silence, and his patience was rewarded, the sound of a man's heavy breathing in the air. The noise wasn't hurried or shallow. It was steady, even. He stepped to the center of the room, coming to a halt in front of the small table he knew was there. Reaching into his jacket, he pulled out a stump of a candle and placed it on the table. He struck a match, touching the flame to the wick as it burned from the heat. With the ceiling bare and the space bereft of any windows, the candle was the only light in the room. There was nothing else to uncover the markings on the walls, the small scratches of countless calculations on the cold, moist stone. Without the candle, the cellar was completely dark. No longer concealed by the shadows, Timothy stared at the magician. His hands were tied behind him, bound to the chair he was sitting on while he faced the small flame before him. The expression on his face was blank, his eyes downcast and his body perfectly still. It was almost as if he were dead. But Timothy looked past this. He took a seat at the opposite side of the table, sitting directly across from Imogik as the light from the candle illuminated his hard-set features. With an equally blank expression, he stared straight ahead, relentlessly patient as time went on. Seconds turned to minutes, and time itself seemed to fall away as he continued to stare. Finally, motivated by some unseen force, Imogik lifted his head. First to the table, and then to the flame. His eyes rested briefly on Timothy's clasped hands before he met his gaze. And then his face went white. "You!" "Yes." Timothy was impassive. "I don't understand. Why?" Imogik opened his mouth, but he shut it immediately after. Another silence stretched between them. This time, it was Timothy who made the first move. Slow, deliberate. He reached into his pockets, producing a faded photograph marked with white creases. He placed it on the table, facing Imogik. "This," he began, "is a memory. A piece of the past that was, for years, tucked away under a child's pillow." He eyed the picture, fingering the faces of the smiling couple. Years later, that child became a woman, the photograph a reminder that she was not alone. Though he followed with his eyes, Imogik did not speak. Timothy pulled out a second photograph, similar to the first, but not quite so worn. "This," he continued, "I do not know what this is. Another memory, I believe, but of a more sinister nature." Expressionless, he held the magician's gaze. "You used it to find these people, and when they didn't have what you were looking for, you killed them." The empty expression on Imogik's face was replaced with confusion. "Why did you bring me here? Why interrogate me?" There was no fear in his voice, only anger. "We are on the same side." He offered no reply. With the two photographs lying face up on the table, he leaned back in his seat, reaching for the last. "This," he said, placing another picture on the table, "is a photograph of that child, now a young woman. Her parents didn't have what you were looking for, so you went after her, only to find that she had escaped your grasp, that she had fled to the market before you could reach her." The look on Imogik's face told him he was on the right track. The magician made no move to interrupt. "But you were thwarted a second time," said Timothy. You realized that she had been switched, that this girl was, in fact, a changeling. It was only after you found this photograph that you knew who you were really searching for. He looked down to the picture on the table, the photo of Saphira hardly visible in the faint light. His eyes flickered upwards once again. I have questions. You will answer them simply, clearly. Imajik was about to speak, but Timothy silenced him with a look of warning. And you will not ask any questions of your own. After a few more seconds, he shut his eyes and took a deep breath. When he opened them again, he asked, Why were you after her? Imajik wasn't in the mood to be difficult. Moderstan, he said. That was all I wanted from her. Timothy frowned, suspicious. What makes you think she would have it? The magician raised an eyebrow. You know the tales better than I do, sir. When Timothy offered no reply, he continued. The Black Stone, Daterstan, is fated to remain a mystery, its place of rest known only by the one who carries it. There surfaced a strange look in his eye, a suspicion, but he only paused a moment before moving on. The Sunstone is destined, time and time again, to find its way to those who carry the blood of the Red Dragon. And the White Stone, as you well know, will always be passed down into the hands of... Those are myths, he interrupted. That story is a fairy tale. All the more reason to believe it. That girl is the Goblin Princess. Whether from confusion or disbelief, Timothy went silent. He had to look away, his eyes falling to the floor in thought. Who else knows? The magician didn't answer. Timothy waited, allowing time to move his stubborn tongue. But the silence continued along with the minutes, and his patience wavered. He stood from his seat, pacing the room. His voice drifted across the table from the dark. Who else knows? He repeated. Imajik wouldn't answer. He had adopted that same blank expression, devoid of emotion, of any feeling whatsoever. His gaze returned to the ground. But Timothy wasn't willing to wait. He reached over his shoulder, bringing up a small leather pouch in the palm of his hand. Imajik watched the movement, neither fearful nor curious, though his eyes remained fixed on his fingers. Without so much as a word, Timothy opened the pouch. A black wave spilled from the tiny satchel, its shapeless form filling the shadowy corners of the room. It slithered, it crawled, it flowed across the cellar and concealed itself in the obscurity at Imajik's back. Tied to the chair, he craned his neck for a glimpse of the monster, sensing the danger. He stifled a cry as a row of teeth bit into his heel. It took all his resolve not to scream as a pair of claws grasped his shoulders. Try as he might to keep composed, his face twitched with the effort. You may not be familiar with these creatures, began Timothy, as if commencing a lecture. They don't prefer a single form, if they have the choice. Rather, the monsters change according to their environment, or their prey. The chair jolted as the monster jumped on Imajik's back, gnawing on his head before he managed to shake it off. We are on the same side, he yelled, his voice betraying his fear. But they also prefer the darkness, he continued, ignoring his cries. Gesturing to the candle, he added, Even something as small as this is enough to keep these creatures at bay. He slammed his hand down on the table, watching Imajik flinch as the flame flickered. "If this candle goes out," he said, "you will die." Imajik was shaking now, his whole body trembling as he fought against the pain. The monster was at his back, clawing, scratching, eagerly lapping up the blood as it spilled down his vulnerable skin. But the shadow kept clear of his face, repelled by the light of the candle. The creature screeched in his ear, his face painfully contorted as he struggled to keep silent. He couldn't take it. "Stop!" Timothy lifted his hand. The monster retreated to the back of the room. The claws had gone, along with the teeth and the stingers, and the screeching had ended. Imajik was left, gasping for breath as he sat bound to the chair, his forehead gleaming with sweat by the faint light of the candle in front of him. The blank expression was gone, replaced by a look of horror which, paired with his infantile features, was a disturbingly close resemblance to the face of a fearful child. But the sight did not sway Timothy. "Who else knows?" he repeated, this time much slower. It was clear he would not say it again. "Lie to me, and I will blow out this candle." His head fell forward, the magician defeated. "No one," he said. "No one knows." The silence resumed. Timothy stepped away from the candle, retreating to the shadows. With his face hidden from view, he released a heavy sigh. At last, Imajik understood. He grasped the motive behind the questions. "I only wanted the stone," he said hurriedly. "I wasn't going to hurt her." Timothy stood to attention. The light from the candle fell on his hand, his knuckles white as he clenched his fist. As the moment passed, however, he emerged from the shadows and took his place back at the table, his expression unchanged. But his eyes were another story. They burned with silent rage, a merciless fury. He leaned low over the table. "I told you not to lie." He blew out the candle. Hi, I'm your narrator, Miranda Eastwood, also the author of The Truth About Goblins. If you liked this chapter, remember to add, follow, or subscribe to this channel so you can hear the next one. And if you didn't like this chapter, oh well, I can't really do anything about that. In any case, I just thought I'd let you know about my Patreon. You can check it out if you'd like to throw some support my way. It would mean a lot to me. Not to mention there's loads of extra exclusive content that I only post on Patreon. While I'm at it, I'll mention that The Truth About Goblins is now available as a complete audiobook, and you can get it wherever you get your audiobooks. Thanks for listening.